Welcome to the Veterinary Blueprint Podcast, brought to you by Butler Vet Insurance, hosted by Bill Butler. The Veterinary Blueprint Podcast is for veterinarians and practice managers who are looking to learn about working on their practice instead of in their practice. Each episode, we will bring you successful, proven blueprints from others both inside and outside the veterinary industry. Welcome to today's episode.
Welcome back to the Veterinary Blueprints Podcast, where we bring business and entrepreneurship to the veterinary practice owners and managers across North America. I am your host, Bill Butler, and today we have an incredible guest joining us, someone who knows the ins and outs of practice financing for veterinarians. Joining me today is Joe Persichetti, the Senior Vice President and Head of Healthcare Business Banking at U.S. Bank. With nearly 2 decades of experience in practice finance, Joe has worked with thousands of healthcare professionals to help them secure funding, expand their practice, and navigate the complex world of banking. From startups to acquisitions and everything in between, he's been at the forefront of helping practices grow. Joe, welcome to the Veterinary Blueprints Podcast. I am thrilled to have you with us today.
Likewise. Thanks for having us, Bill. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Why don't you give our listeners a little background on yourself? I know you have an extensive background in finance and banking overall, practice
Sure.
finance and banking, and you're now at U.S. Bank. So how did you get into this overall, and how do you wind up at U.S. Bank?
Sure. So, I've been fortunate enough in my entire career is really surrounded around financing and banking. And for the last 24 years, it's been healthcare specific in helping doctors, dentists, and veterinarians across the country really, live their dreams and acquire, start practices, grow them, expand, et cetera. And that really started to resonate early on in my career of how important that was, right? Because if you're in a community, and I used to have a small Italian restaurant in a small town in Columbus, Ohio as well, and realizing when you're part of a community how important healthcare is, right? Both in medical and veterinarian and having access to care for both your pets and yourself are extremely important. And so it just kind of stuck with me that, the best thing that I could do would be to continue to give back in that world. So roughly 2 years ago, I came over to U.S. Bank because I was fortunate enough for them to give me a call. And really, they've been in healthcare financing in some form or fashion for the last 100 years.
Sure.
But they had reached out and asked me, what could they do differently that I would be interested in helping a new initiative to expand and grow even further in healthcare at U.S. Bank. And really, when I thought about that, it was an interesting comment, right? Of like what's not being done or what could be done a little bit differently. And I really looked at who we were serving and going back to that community base of what clients need in the healthcare profession. And it's really access to local bankers, not just on the front end, not just when they're getting their lending and you've got a business development officer that helps you with your loan, but what about the servicing of that loan? What about all the other products that you decide to bank with? Because let's be honest, like if I'm a healthcare provider, I'm a veterinarian, whoever it might be, like I don't have enough time in my day. I'm serving clients. I'm serving my patients. I don't have enough time to contact 4 or 5 different bankers, right? So
Sure.
if I have access to a local person that I have their phone number and I can reach out and say, hey, I'm having an issue with my checking account or this deposit's not working. The quicker that we can get them back working on their patients, the better.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of what I went back to U.S. Bank with is I was like, let's expand and make sure that we have the right products, but let's also make sure that we're servicing them both on new requests, lending's very important, but also on the back end, because a lot of people, they move their service to call centers or 1-800 numbers. And the problem with that is like our healthcare providers get 1 or 2 classes in school that are around running a business, not nearly enough.
Absolutely.
And then as they get better at it and they expand and they have multiple practices, then their needs and their issues become bigger as well.
Sure.
So having that quicker access where your bankers down the street, we thought was very important, especially on the servicing aspect of it. So that's what we did. We just hired our 101st person in the last 12 months to be focused on healthcare specific. So we have bankers all across the country, not just looking for new lending from a development standpoint, but also relationship managers so that our clients know who to work with after the loan is done.
So I know that's a relatively new initiative for U.S. Bank specifically. And growing, I know that you've been on a hiring spree. I've seen it here in Minnesota with our local U.S. Bank rep. And so, from an initiative perspective, I think, what are the one or two things besides that personal touch that you're trying to bring to the veterinary or healthcare space with this build out?
Yeah, I think you have to start with expertise, right? So going back to what our clients, what our healthcare providers need, which is quick access to advice. We need our bankers to be experts. So that's the first thing that we looked at, because again, like I can put them local, but if they only work with a doctor, dentist, or veterinarian once a quarter, or if they only work with dentists or they only work with doctors and they don't understand a veterinarian's needs, they're all different. The terminology is different. The degree of need in all of the products, merchant payments, wealth, etc. So that was the second thing that was important to us, is to find people that had a healthcare background, wherever it was, whether it was internal at US Bank or external people that we brought on. And so that was the second piece that we kind of focused on.
Yeah, I know the credit merchant piece here in Minnesota has been big for a long time, and now you're building out some of these other components. Well, as we talk about veterinarians and the thought of owning a practice, I'm seeing a lot of startups happening, a lot of perpetuation in the 1 and 2 doc practices just in the industry. From your experience and background in animal health and you've been at this a lot longer than I have. What do you see? Do you get asked often about work-life balance, and can you have work-life balance if you're a practice owner?
I do. It's probably one of the top 2 questions that we get. And I think that, I don't probably lead by example. I think I could be better personally at work-life balance.
I've got we all could, right?
I have 4 kids at home and probably, get thrown into different places. But I get that question a lot, especially with people that are just coming out of school or 1 or 2 years out of school, where they're like, I've looked at the different options. I think the one thing that veterinarians have today that maybe 10 years ago was there but not as prevalent is access to information. And I think they ask more questions, which is a good thing, right? Like they can research stuff. They're listening to your podcast. They go to some of these shows, and they're getting more information, which is great. And they're also asking a lot more questions. So they're asking, I know what's available. I could go the corporate route. I could start my own practice. I could buy my own practice. I think I want to be an independent owner, but is that even possible? Yeah. And can I still enjoy my kids and things like that? And I think the first thing that we tell them is build a team around you, right? Like if you try to do and that's the one that I struggle with, right? Is like, if you try to do everything yourself, it's harder to get stuff done. So the most important thing that you can do is, before you make that decision of starting or acquiring a practice, is sit and ask questions of, who do I need around me? You need a banker that can understand healthcare, so that you're not trying to educate your own banker, your own local banker, on what you need and why you need working capital if you're starting up a practice, and why if you're starting a practice from scratch, you need an interest-only payment period. But you also need a veterinarian specific advisor and CPA, an attorney that understands how these acquisitions work. So the more you build a team around you, the better off you can be from a work-life balance standpoint.
Well, and having just been down at WVC in Vegas, Genius Vets had a symposium on startups. There's no shortage, as you mentioned. There's no shortage of information out there. And if you're a veterinarian and you're interested in this, and you haven't been to one of these big national shows, VMX, WVC, AHA, AVMA, the big players, the not that there aren't good resources at your local MVMA. We have a lot of those locally, but also nationally. And, so there's tons of resources out there. And, generally what's interesting is, the bankers generally know all the players, as you mentioned, the CPAs, the attorneys, the insurance, because it all falls into that acquisition or that startup. And so working with a banker who's got experience in the marketplace can be an advantage versus you trying to go out and find and vet people from the get-go. Yeah.
And not only does it help from a work-life balance standpoint, but it also can save you money, right? If you don't rush into a decision and you just ask the right questions, the first thing that you should do is start at home and write what is important to you. Is it the hours that you work in the day? Is there a certain income that you need for, you and your spouse, if you have one, to live off of? What are your priorities? And once you have that priority list, you kind of build your perfect dream practice, whether it's a startup acquisition or whatever, around that. And asking questions up front before signing on a lease space or negotiating on a deal, so that you're not trying to, backtrack or adding additional expenses later, is a great way to start it.
Yeah.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
This episode of the Veterinary Blueprint Podcast is sponsored by Butler Vet Insurance. Being an insurance agent at Butler Vet Insurance, I've seen firsthand the difficulties veterinarians face insuring their practices. But do you know that we wrote the book on veterinary insurance? It's called Protecting Your Veterinary Practice: Insider Insurance Secrets Every Veterinarian Must Know. It's not just a book, it's a comprehensive guide that speaks to the unique challenges and insurance solutions for the veterinary community. With over 20 years experience, from cyber liability to business auto and workers' compensation, our aim at Butler Vet Insurance is to reduce the stress of insurance for those dedicated to animal care. If you're a veterinary practice owner or manager and looking for some guidance on your insurance, follow our insurance blueprint. Discover the Butler Vet Insurance difference. And together, let's put the pieces of the puzzle together. Butler Vet Insurance, reducing the stress of insurance. What trends, sitting in your chair, is a lot different than my chair. You see quite a bit more. You've got as you said, you just hired 101 people across the United States. What trends are you seeing in veterinary lending and animal health, specifically with startups? We touched on a little bit, but what are you seeing in the industry?
We are seeing, probably in the last 5 years, a resurgence of startups, of people that are, whether they're confident or they want to build, they go to WVC or they go to some of these events and they see their dream office and decide, let's start it, instead of something else. So we are seeing more startups. Certainly a ton of independent acquisitions still happening as well. I think the bigger questions that we get is that, one, how are the performance? So the performance is still extremely strong, which is, from a bank standpoint, what we look at first, right? In these, a new business or a business transitioning hands, how is that performing? And these are still, I don't want to say recession proof, but recession resistant businesses that do really, really strong. Especially you look at, animal health and what happened during COVID, and everybody went out to get a new pet or to expand. And that demand out there on the healthcare needs of your animals is strong, which means that, we need more offices, especially in growing areas. You look at where I'm at today in Columbus, Ohio, we have a lot of tech companies coming in, like Intel and Facebook and things like that. That means more jobs. It means more communities. It means you need more healthcare, both for yourself and your pet. Same thing in parts of Texas, as businesses have moved, corporate offices into Texas, more construction going on. So I think the first thing that we get asked is, are these still viable from a bank standpoint or from a numbers? And the answer is yes, that they're performing very, very well. We've seen what we call revenue curves, which is the anticipated revenue of a veterinarian office in year 1, 2, and 3 as they're starting up, continuing to grow, meaning that the revenue is expanding, which is great. And then the last thing that we get asked is, I'm coming out of school with significant debt.
Yeah.
Like, is that going to prevent me from getting financing? And really, you should talk to advisors early. Doesn't mean that it has to be a bank. It could be your CPA. It could be a consultant, whatever it might be. But you should ask those questions, because really, it's expected that you're going to have that level of debt. You're furthering your career in a healthcare field. What you should be more concerned about, instead of the debt itself, is less about the $300,000 or $400,000 or $500,000 of debt that you got, and more about, what is my payment? And there's a lot of different payment options out there now. Between all the federal based, there's some independently based programs that extend it out. So cash flow is what you should look at first. And going back to that comment I made about your first step should be sitting down as a family and be like, what do we want to do? What are our goals? How much do I need to make?
Yeah.
And if you know that question on the student loan piece, it becomes, can I get the payment of my student loans to be a reasonable payment? So it allows me to do all these other things.
Yeah.
So really, that's the most advice that a lot of my bankers give, veterinarians that are asking the questions across the country is, look at your payment and make sure that it's not like, because there's some debt you want to pay down quickly, right?
Yeah.
Like cars, credit cards, pay them off each month, all that stuff. But from a student loan or from a home mortgage, do you have the right payment? So that, because if you're under the mindset of, I only want to pay down debt quickly, but you get yourself underwater, then that can be a bigger challenge. So it's easier to be flexible and make sure that you have a payment that you can work with and then back into it from there.
Sure. And I think what I took away from that, Joe, is the short answer is student debt is not a barrier to practice ownership.
That's right.
And I think it just goes to, having been at WVC, not only was U.S. Bank there, but every bank under the sun, the veterinary space is a safe bet from a business perspective, which is why the banks are there, because they know it's a safe bet. And as you said, there was a little bit of a risk, I don't want to say recession, but coming back down to earth post-COVID for the animal health industry, but it's still very, stronger than a lot of other industries out there. And so it's very attractive for lenders. So it's about finding the right lender. Well, part of that process in thinking about talking to a lender, how long does the loan process take, or what should I come prepared if I'm going to talk to a U.S. Bank rep in my local state, or at, if I come up to your booth at AVMA, what should I have ready, or what should I be prepared with?
I mean, that's a great question. I think the first thing that I would say is the length of time depends on how far along in the process you're in. If you bring your lender in after you have found a practice that you've identified that you want to purchase and you have a close date and you've got all the financials of that business that you're looking to acquire, that should take, a week to 2 weeks for somebody to look at and decide if that's a deal that cash flows and meets the things to approve. As far as when you should engage your lender, I would do it as early as possible, because they'll make sure that you're introduced to the team that Bill and I are talking about, but two, it might change your mind on, did you ask the right questions? So if you're looking to start up a practice, you might be like, I can't even go to a bank because I don't even know where to go. I don't even know where I want to, and I don't know how much it's going to cost. And I think that's the home mortgage mentality, right? Of like, I need to know an exact dollar amount and then go to my lender.
Yeah, find it.
In business lending, it's almost like bring them in early as a consultant so that we can at least say, well, what are you looking to do? This is what, historically the average practice looks at. What areas are you looking at? Are you looking at your community or a community next to you? Why are you asking, or why are you looking in that community? And then if you bring us in early, where it's more of a pre-approval, it could be a longer process because you haven't even found the location and stuff like that yet. But I would still suggest or encourage bringing a lender in early, just so that they can ask the right questions for you.
And as far as bringing items to the table, obviously having your personal finances in decent shape, right? Like, you don't want to have $15,000 in credit card debt and you just bought 2 cars and you've got an 8% mortgage and all these things. You go, hey, I want to buy a practice, like having some of those things in order, as you said, making sure that you're paying down your credit card. But I heard this from another lender is, as you said, paying down debt is not necessarily always the best thing to do. And so if you've got $50,000 or $60,000 cash in the bank, don't think, I should throw that at my student loans to get my student loan debt down. You're better off potentially leaving that money in the bank.
Yeah, I think, the banks in this space, especially the ones that are healthcare specific or have healthcare divisions, and there's a lot of great banks out there, look at the entire picture, right? So, and what I mean by that is a veterinarian out of school for 2 years that is just starting to make money, still has student loan debt, is going to look different, and that's okay, than somebody that's been out 10 years and making a ton of money over that 10-year period. And so that becomes the character piece of underwriting, which is, how much have you made over the last couple of years? What should you have, and where is it, right? So it's kind of spending that piece. The other piece that you're mentioning is get advice early on, whether it's a CPA, a lender, a consultant, somebody in the industry that you trust around, that people will call it liquidity, but it's really cash. And the reason that it's important is in an event of a rainy day, which can happen in any, personally, not even just in any field, do you have some money in case something happens? whether it's to you or your family, or you need to pause your business. So going back to your point, Bill, taking all of your cash and being like, my banker's going to want to see that I have zero debt. So I just made $100,000. I'm going to pay it all off.
I'm going to pay off
only
my
have
cars.
$1,000 in the bank.
I'm going to pay off all my cars.
Yeah.
And
that becomes a challenge because, again, all I care about on that car payment is your actual payment.
Yeah.
Can you afford that payment in your income? So they're making sure that you're talking to people is key because, again, you don't want to liquidate yourself because you have to have some money set aside for a rainy day.
Yeah. When I go to meet with a lender, whether it's a, U.S. bank or any of the other banks out there, what are some questions that you think are key to ask that lender to make sure they're working with the right one? In the first chapter of my book, I asked, 9 questions you should ask your insurance agent if you're going to work with them. What are 1 or 2 questions that a veterinarian who's going to, acquire or start a practice, whether it's build a building or leasehold improvement or acquire something, what are a couple questions they should ask that, you think are critical for them?
I think number 1 is, are you healthcare specific? And I think where that's important goes back to our comment earlier, where you could save yourself time, most importantly, money, and just overall experience by having somebody that's looked at your situation a few different times before.
Yeah.
The second piece of that is, what are the terms that you guys offer? Because, going back to cash flow, if it's a local bank and they only go to 7-year terms and you have all this student loan debt and you really need a 10-year or 15-year term, that 7-year term might put you in the wrong space. What is the flexibility of your prepayment? Again, events happen, you want to acquire another office, and that bank doesn't want you to acquire another office, and you have to move your banking relationship. Is it going to cost you additional money? So what are your terms? What is your overall structure? Do you offer 100% financing to acquire a practice, including working capital, so money to pay the first couple months of bills as you're starting to get, you got
to pay for that insurance up front. I'm going to ask for 25% down, unfortunately, to get the insurance started. They'll put you on a payment plan, but getting equipment and even if it's an existing practice, there's going to be you're going to need some working capital in the bank to pay some bills as you get things going. So, and
then I think lastly, so if the first 3 are, do you work with a lot of healthcare lenders or a lot of healthcare clients? What are your terms and what is the flexibility of offering 100% financing and working capital? And then the last piece, which is not asked enough, is what happens after my loan? If I have a question on my loan, or the payment doesn't go through, or the deposit that you're requiring me to have, I'm not able to get checks in, who do I call? Because again, you have a few healthcare veterinarians are such a unique business, right? Because not only are you, helping with the office and even if you have an office manager, you're part of that.
Yeah.
But most importantly, you're working with your patients, which is why most veterinarians got into this in the first place, because of their love and care for animals. So when you have a 10-hour day, but you've got patients all day and you still have to eat so you don't pass out, you have a 20-minute window to fix your banking problem, whether it's your credit card machine's not working or your deposit. And that's the question that most people don't ask is, okay, I do my loan with you.
Now
what happens next? Do I call a 1-800 number? Do I call you? If I don't call you, who is it? Knowing that, again, it goes back to time and efficiency. The quicker you can get a hold of somebody so that you can go back to generating revenue and helping patients is better for everybody.
There's nothing worse as a business owner, speaking from my own chair, than having a problem with banking at 4:45 on a Friday, trying to get a payment in, and you're like, well, I got to run payroll on Monday, and this needs to be in the bank, and all of those problems, and just having that relationship with somebody who knows how to fix it. And
especially if there's an issue and you have to take time out of your day, which means that you have to tell a patient to hold on. And, if that animal's sick or, it backs up, you have to cancel. That's again, revenue that you're losing. So it all adds up.
Well, as we start to wrap up here, Joe, I think the question that I would ask is if I was a veterinarian listening to this podcast or out there in the world and I wanted to start a practice, can I do it? Is it viable for me to do in today's market with the current environment? You hear about corporates, you see a lot of things happening in the space. We were down at WVC and they were talking about the mid-level practitioners. And so there's a lot of disruption in the marketplace. Right. But if I'm a veterinarian, I want to start a practice, can I? Do you think it's possible?
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes. I think the more important, longer answer is everybody has their own unique wants, right? What I value in my life is probably different than yours and vice versa. So sitting down and creating that key and making sure that you know exactly what you want, both personally and professionally, I think is the starting place. But from a numbers standpoint, we are seeing a ton of demand. These are great, viable businesses. I mentioned the revenue is continuing to grow year after year. So when you talk about, some of the other things, expenses are also growing. Yes, but so is the revenue, right? So like you're still able to make, the income that you expect or you wanted to when you were getting out of school. So the short answer is yes. And the longer answer is make sure that you understand the bigger picture of exactly what you're looking for and then build it from there.
Well, I think that's great advice, Joe. One thing that I've done with my business over the years is create that vision and then, make decisions based on that vision. So, you brought that up a number of times, is sitting down at home and spending some quiet time thinking about what do I want my practice to look like? How much money do I want to make? What color are the walls in my practice? I mean, things like that matter because then when you're making those decisions, it helps guide you along the way and can put you where you want to be. From a revenue or from a ownership perspective, I don't know if it's talked about a lot or enough. What's the difference between associate pay and owner pay? I mean, from you see the numbers and what owners are making out there. If you're a veterinarian who wants to make some money, where do you maximize that?
And so that's the beauty of it, right? Is that if you're an owner, you determine for the most part, right? There could be some regional things, how much square footage, how many animals can you see in a day, things like that. But you determine your own schedule. So when you really look at it that way, how many patients can you see? The revenue is more in your control.
Sure.
And you can make more money significantly because of the fact that you don't have to rely on an owner telling you as an associate, these are the cases that you'll see today and kind of be capped. So and there's other things that you can do, again, going back to creating your own team, working with the right insurance partner, working with the right attorney and CPA. There's ways to maximize your expenses so that you can make more money in your office by doing certain things.
Yeah. Well, that's great advice, Joe. We really appreciate the time. We'll have some information about how to reach out to you and U.S. Bank in the show notes. If there was one tip for veterinarians out there that you would leave them with, what would it be?
It would be find your team early.
Find your team early. That's like, from the podcast perspective, that's like 2/3 of everyone's top tip is find a team early. And, there's no shortage, as you mentioned, of resources out there for people to find their team, whether it's insurance, CPAs, builders, architects, practice consultants, brokers. They're all out there and they're just itching to help veterinarians achieve their dreams. And they can do it with U.S. Bank and Practice Finance Division headed by Joe Persichetti. Well, thanks so much, Joe, for your time today. Really appreciate your insights.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. As always, everyone, remember to like, share, and review the podcast. It helps us get our message out to all the veterinarians out there and practice managers looking to grow their business and practice with entrepreneurship and business insights. Thanks so much for joining us in today's episode.